Alright, I'll craft a chilling horror story in English about highway ghosts set in the American landscape. The narrative will be around 5,000 words without sections or subtitles, using strong opening hooks and vivid descriptions of settings, names, and regions to match an American atmosphere. Let me begin with a powerful hook. The wind howled like a banshee through the skeletal trees lining Route 41, slicing through the rusted chain-link fence that separated the cracked asphalt from the endless stretch of pine forest. It was past midnight, the kind of darkness that swallowed headlights whole, making even the most seasoned truckers uneasy as they passed through this godforsaken stretch of highway cutting through the heart of rural Georgia. Most drivers gave this part of the road a wide berth after sundown, muttering about strange flickers in the rearview mirror or hearing distant voices that couldn't possibly belong to another human soul. But tonight, someone had decided to tempt fate. A battered Ford F-150 rumbled along the deserted highway, its engine coughing and wheezing like a dying animal. Behind the wheel sat Caleb Mitchell, a wiry man in his late 30s with bloodshot eyes and fingers stained yellow from years of chain smoking. He wasn't afraid of ghost stories, he'd heard plenty from old-timers at roadside diners, but he needed the money, and delivering a load of used car parts to Birmingham meant crossing through this cursed stretch of land. Besides, Caleb thought to himself as he lit another cigarette and squinted into the yawning blackness ahead, what was the worst that could happen? He had been driving for hours, the monotony broken only by the occasional flicker of a passing street lamp or the dim glow of a gas station sign blinking weakly in the distance. The radio crackled with static, refusing to settle on any one station, but occasionally it would catch fragments of music or garbled voices speaking in tongues he didn't recognize. Caleb chalked it up to poor reception and turned the volume down, not wanting to listen to whatever nonsense might come spilling out next. About 20 minutes outside of a tiny town called Harlan's Creek, Caleb caught sight of something unusual in the distance, a figure standing on the side of the road, illuminated faintly by the glow of his headlights. At first, he assumed it was just another stranded motorist, maybe someone who'd run out of gas or blown a tire. But as he drew closer, the unease settled deeper into his gut. The figure wasn't waving or signaling for help, it was simply standing there, motionless, arms hanging limply at its sides, head tilted forward as if staring at its own feet. Caleb slowed the truck to a crawl and rolled down his window, preparing to ask if everything was okay. That's when he saw her face. It was twisted into a grotesque smile, lips stretched so wide that they nearly tore the corners of her mouth. Her eyes were hollow voids, dark and empty, reflecting no light. She raised her head slowly, locking onto Caleb with that dead-eyed stare, and opened her mouth wide, impossibly wide, as if trying to swallow the very air around her. Then, without warning, she stepped directly into the path of his truck. Caleb slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching in protest against the slick pavement. The truck skidded to a halt inches from where the woman had stood, but she was gone. No trace of her remained, not a footprint, not a shred of clothing, not even a warm smear of blood on the road. Caleb sat frozen behind the wheel, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. His hands shook violently as he reached for the door handle, considering stepping outside to investigate further. But then he remembered the stories. The whispers exchanged over lukewarm coffee and diner pie, the tales of hitchhikers who vanished into thin air, of drivers who picked up passengers only to find their vehicles abandoned later with no explanation. His instincts screamed at him to get the hell out of there, and he obeyed them without hesitation. Slamming his foot down on the accelerator, he sent the truck lurching forward, tires fishtailing slightly before regaining traction. The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly now, the familiar landmarks disappearing as if the world itself had shifted during those few terrifying moments. Caleb glanced briefly at his rearview mirror, half expecting to see the woman's face pressed against the glass, that hideous grin still plastered across her features. Instead, he saw something worse. In the distance, far behind him but growing steadily closer, was a pair of glowing red eyes. They hovered just above the road, detached from any visible body, moving unnaturally fast. Caleb stared at them in disbelief, willing himself to blink and make them disappear. But they remained, drawing nearer with every passing second, until they were close enough for him to realize they weren't attached to anything living or dead. There was no shape, no form, just two burning orbs of crimson light cutting through the darkness like twin lasers. Suddenly, the lights vanished. Caleb let out a shuddering breath, unsure whether relief or dread should dominate his emotions. He tried to focus on driving, but the road ahead began to twist and warp, the edges blurred and hazy as though viewed through dirty glass. Shapes moved in his peripheral vision, figures darting between the trees, shadows flitting across the asphalt, always just out of reach. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, fighting the urge to look away from the road and check the back seat or the passenger seat. Something told him he wouldn't like what he found if he did. Then came the whispering. Soft, unintelligible murmurs filled the cab of the truck, emanating from nowhere and everywhere all at once. Caleb turned up the radio in a desperate attempt to drown out the noise, but the static returned louder than ever, punctuated by bursts of distorted laughter and muffled screams. He reached for the dial, intending to turn it off completely, but froze when he felt something cold brush against the back of his neck. It was a hand, an icy, bony hand that clutched his shoulder with unnatural strength. Caleb spun around, expecting to see someone sitting in the back seat, but there was no one there. The hand tightened, pulling him backward, forcing him to relinquish control of the wheel. The truck veered sharply off the road, crashing through the fence and plunging into the woods below. Trees closed in around him, branches cracking against the windshield as the vehicle tumbled down the hillside. When it finally came to rest, silence fell once more. Caleb lay slumped against the driver's seat, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. He blinked groggily, trying to piece together what had happened. The door creaked open slowly, revealing nothing but the inky blackness of the forest. A chill ran down Caleb's spine as he realized he wasn't alone anymore. Something, or someone, was watching him. From deep within the woods, the whispering began again, louder this time, clearer. Words formed amidst the cacophony, spoken in voices both familiar and foreign. Names were called, names belonging to people Caleb hadn't thought about in years. He recognized some, childhood friends lost to time, family members long since buried, strangers whose faces haunted his dreams. The voice grew stronger, more insistent, demanding entry into his mind. "No," Caleb whispered hoarsely, pressing his hands against his temples. "Get out!" But the voices only laughed, a chorus of cruel, mocking tones that echoed through the trees. Shadows danced around him, coalescing into shapes that resembled human forms yet moved with eerie precision. One figure stepped forward, its face obscured by darkness except for those same red eyes he had seen earlier. It extended a hand toward him, palm open, an invitation, or perhaps a command. Caleb knew he had to escape, but his body refused to obey. The cold seeped into his bones, numbing his limbs and clouding his thoughts. The last thing he remembered before darkness claimed him was the sound of footsteps approaching from all directions, closing in on his broken-down truck like wolves surrounding their prey. When the sun rose the next morning, Route 41 was quiet once more. Birds chirped in the trees, and the wind carried the scent of damp earth and pine needles. If anyone had noticed the wrecked truck lying in the ditch, they didn't say anything. Locals knew better than to meddle with the ghosts of the highway. But somewhere deep in the woods, a new addition joined the ranks of the lost souls wandering Highway 41, forever searching for a ride home.